Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. All right, awesome. So welcome to our Yin Yoga sequencing webinar. And my name is Devi Daly, and I know many of you and I don't know some of you. So this is a webinar that is for yoga teachers who are interested in getting better at Yin Yoga sequencing, or you might be a yoga teacher who isn't teaching Yin Yoga yet, or you might be a yoga teacher who already does teach Yin Yoga, or you might be someone who's thinking about teaching yoga and you love Yin Yoga, or maybe you are someone who wants to start just designing your own sequences for home practice. And we have such rich home practice happening right now, right, with these times that we're in. And I know that some of you just love it so much and are sharing it with your partners or your family or your loved ones, and you want to just learn sequencing just for your personal practice. So whatever your reason is to be here, welcome. I'm Devi, and if you could just please put something in the chat about two things. One, where you are joining from, where in the world you are located, and also whether you are already a yoga teacher or not, whether if you are a yoga teacher, if you're already a Yin Yoga teacher. I'd love to just kind of get a feel for who's here. And some of you are my past Yin Yoga trainees, so I'd love to have you remind me and let everyone know if you're one of the YYTT grads. That's what I call it, YYTT. All right, and while those come in, I'm going to start us out with, there we go, that's better, a little bit of fun. Okay, so Yin Yoga sequencing webinar. I want to start this out by dedicating to the people I learned Yin Yoga from, wonderful people named Susie and Paul Grilly, and they introduced me to this practice about 15 years ago that has changed my life so profoundly. I've had the pleasure of studying a lot with them. They're kind of like rebels of the yoga world, and I therefore have also become a rebel of the yoga world. A delightful rebel, I like to call it. We're like delightful rebels, or sometimes we call Yin Yoga like the punk rock of yoga. And these are my more recent teachers of meditation, and they're also kind of rebels of the meditation world, Lauren Roche and Camille Maureen. Lauren is the translator of the Radiant Sutras, which is an amazing text that I've been just diving into thoroughly with my heart and soul for the past 6 months studying with them. And they're also, through the Radiant Sutras, teaching this instinctive meditation, which I've been adopting and calling it meditation for Yin Yogis, because it is so relevant to Yin Yoga. And I have a lot more to say about that, but I won't say it quite yet. So this is me. There's a picture of me here that might be a little hidden. This is me when I started my first yoga studio, my only yoga studio that I ever started. And I was a youngster here. I had really just started even doing yoga like 2 years earlier, but I loved it so much. I was in Tucson, Arizona, and I started this studio called Tucson Yoga. And this was quite a journey. I started it in 2003 and ended up having my own space, my own staff of 10 teachers, these beautiful beings here who taught a variety of stuff, vinyasa, hatha. We brought Yin in later. The top guy, third from the right, is Joe Barnett, who was my first Yin Yoga teacher, who introduced me to Paul and Susie, and he's an amazing Yin Yoga teacher who travels around the world sharing the love. This is one of our classes. We had really large studio, large operation, and I ran that for 10 years until it was time to move to Northern California. So I sold the studio, and then I ended up here at this beautiful space inside a barn in Point Reyes Station. So this is Point Reyes Yoga, and I taught there for the past 11 years, and I still teach there through Zoom classes at the moment. And this is our community. It's kind of a very popular place to retire, so a lot of the people in the community are retirement age. And so as I was adopting Yin Yoga into my life with this move to Northern California, I really got to teach older bodies a lot and prepare my own body for this process of aging that it's going through. And Yin Yoga is so amazing for that. So that's something that really comes into my teaching. And as we talk more about sequencing in just a moment, I'll be bringing that into our discussion. And so Point Reyes Yoga, these are the wonderful proprietors, Amanda Giacomini, who might be here. I'm not sure if you're here, but hi, Amanda, and MC Yogi, her husband. And they have given me the opportunity, the space to start teaching Yin Yoga teacher trainings at Point Reyes Yoga. I started doing that through their studio in 2013. And I've been doing it every year, and then I've begun to be hired and to teach it in various other yoga studios. And so this webinar that we're doing today is a nugget from that teacher training that I really wanted to share in this format today. And these are some of the images from my training. This one was at Marin Power Yoga here near where I am in Marin County. And this is one of my groups in Oakland, California. And this is my group in the barn. We're in the barn in Point Reyes Station with Amanda and some wonderful friends there. And so now I'm teaching online. I kind of took the opportunity of the pandemic to just really start doing something I had dreamed about, which is to teach online for good. And so I'm still connected with Point Reyes Yoga, but this is my website where I'm teaching classes online. And I have community calendars that my community of yogis follow with me. And so this is my website, and I have online classes, I have programs that my community of yogis follow, a 10 days of Yin program. I have my Yin Yoga teacher training that is just launching this weekend, Gentle on the Joints, a 4-week yoga program. The 21-day yoga challenge is super fun, a half hour of yoga a day, Yin and Yang yoga. So that's a little bit about me, and let's launch into this material. So choosing a theme for your Yin class is kind of the biggest thing to do before you start thinking about sequencing. So what is it that you want to do with the group that you're going to be teaching? And who is the group you're going to be teaching? So the first choice is just a nice full body Yin practice. If you have a sort of standard like hour-long time that you want to take, then you can definitely get a full body practice in. And there's a few different ways to go about that we'll talk about in a sec. And you could also do it by the target area of the body or by the meridian. And so this is when we get into the Yin Yoga archetypes, that if you wanted to work with one specific archetype or one specific region, they correlate with the traditional Chinese medicine meridians. And we talk about that in Yin Yoga teacher training, about the details of that. You could choose, I want to work on the lower body, ribs down, the hips, or I want to work more on the spine, which would be more like forward bends, backward bends, and twists. Or if you wanted to stick with the hips, you'd be mostly looking at the asymmetrical poses, the hip openers, the external rotation poses, the square pose, the shoelace pose. And you could not have it be such a physical focus at all. It could be more of a meditative experience where you choose postures that are more relaxing, maybe some more propped options or more postures on the back, or just things that maybe don't put the body under a lot of stress so that you can really focus on releasing. So that could be called a meditative focus or a restorative kind of focus as well, especially if you use lots of props. And there could be where you kind of focus on nature or the life force, where again, it doesn't matter so much what poses you're doing, but you are working on inviting the elements into the practice, inviting the energy of the sun. Maybe you'd bring in some of the Taoist movement that we like to bring in with Yin and Yang yoga. You could do any old practice and then read poetry, or you can do any kind of inspiring reading while you teach. People love this. I like to read the Radiant Sutras sometimes to my students, and that can be amazing for people to just hear the same verse a few times in a pose. The words are so beautiful. You could do it with Rumi, you could do it with any text that inspires you, or any kind of beautiful words. Now let's move on to the right side column here. The chakras, of course, is a popular way to go about sequencing a yin class, or just choosing a theme for a yin class. And the heart is a great one to work with, where you work with your back bends and a lot of your upper body postures. And in a lot of yin yoga, we're kind of by default already working with the first and second chakras because of the emphasis on the hips, and the third chakra to some extent. But you can choose to talk about those chakras as much as you want to. That could be the theme of your class. You could get into emotional exploration in yin yoga. You could choose any theme whatsoever. There's a lot of room to work with that. And you could add pranayama to yin practice. You could work with the bandha, have a certain kind of breath. There, as you probably know already, there is not any prescribed way to breathe in yin yoga. There's not any way you're supposed to breathe. And it can be nice to just allow the breath to be, and to pay attention to the breath, to tend to it, to let it be what it wants to be. But you could also add breathing techniques. And this one, simple anatomical instructions. This is actually kind of a go-to for me. If you've taken my practices, I really, a lot of the time, just find such a depth in, like, this is what we're doing now. We're stretching this part of the body. Notice how that feels. And for a busy mind that is wanting to have some release physically and mentally, this can be amazing to just let the practice do its magic without imposing anything on it. So that's kind of a common thing that I do, a full body practice with just simple, like, awareness of body parts and awareness of what the pose is doing in the body. So this next item is the most important thing on this list, which is choose one thing, not a bunch of things. So all these things that we just went through on this list of ways that you could choose to theme your class, it would be way too much to choose even two of these things. It's just too, this is one of the biggest mistakes that yin yoga teachers make, is to apply too many different things, and aromatherapy, and there's just so much to focus on. And what we really want to do as we evolve as teachers, and as our students evolve as our students, is to let the beauty of the practice speak for itself. Let it do its magic without needing to fill the space with lots of talking, lots of techniques, lots of imagery. So maybe if you're going to choose a theme, just choose one of these things and stick with it, and let it be simple. Make it easy for yourself. Make it so that your students have something to relax into. And also, don't underestimate the power of routine and familiarity. So, like I've said, my full body class, what I call my classic yin yoga sequence with simple anatomical instructions, that is what I've taught my weekly yin yoga classes in person for years, for the most part. I'll occasionally bring something else in, but people have never complained that it's the same thing every time. They love the routine. It's kind of a ritual that we do together, with little changes here and there, of course. But the students at that point, when they're regular students, they really kind of make the practice. They are the ones who bring the energy into the room. They go in deep with me, and they help each other. And I hardly have to talk at all when I have a regular group that is working on that level with me. Okay, let's look at this next slide, and I don't know where to put this picture of me. Let's get me out of the way. Okay. So sequencing by demographics is another idea entirely. So instead of having a certain experience you want to have them to have, sometimes you just have to look at who you're working with. And so I told you I've worked with older adults a lot, and for that group, it's very similar to what you'd teach a group of inflexible people. And I'm very careful when I talk about this to not pigeonhole all older adults, and I'm not using an age on this because some people feel like they identify with the term older adults and some don't. So if your body feels like your joints are doing things that are different than they did when you were younger, then that might be a criteria for being an older adult, at least in the yin yoga context. But that said, I have had 80-year-olds who fold in half with their chest to their thighs, and a lot of the things I'm about to say don't apply to them. So, so we could say stiffer people, inflexible people, or the things that happen to a lot of older adult bodies, but not all of them. So wall and floor postures are great for this kind of population. And this is also people who don't do a lot of yoga. Maybe it's even their first yoga class. So staying on the floor without sitting postures can be some of the most challenging, and if there's someone who's not very flexible in their hips and they come to their first yoga class and they're being told to sit for half the poses, they're probably not going to come back to yoga. So people love figure 4, lying on the back, placing one foot over the ankle, and they tend to not like sleeping swan. When there's stiffness in the hips, it causes a lot of knee pain for people. Now we do, in my yin yoga teacher training, talk a lot about sleeping swan and shoelace and square pose in all the different variations you can do of these poses that do surprise people in how they can get around that knee pain. But then it's important to not have the pose be the thing that it's about. It's not about the pose. It's about what you're stretching, what target area. So figure 4 stretches the same target area as sleeping swan. And figure 4 at the wall is a great option for inflexible people. And legs up the wall pose is another wonderful option for stretching the spine gently, for stretching the legs. And a lot of us who are yoga teachers tend to maybe not feel much because a lot of us are on the more flexible side, and that's why we ended up being yoga teachers. That certainly doesn't speak for all yoga teachers, but people who are more flexible, when we do legs up the wall pose, it's more just relaxing, restorative. But for people who have a lot of stiffness or who have bones in their hips that don't let them forward bend easily, legs up the wall is a stretch. It's a strong stretch in the hamstrings especially, but also in the spine. So probably don't even need to say this, but avoid saddle pose for inflexible groups. But do make sure to incorporate other postures for the quads and the hip flexors. And what I see a lot is people, when I teach saddle and they're on the inflexible side, or they've somehow decided, oh, saddle's not for me, which is fine. I never force anyone to do a pose. What ends up happening is that they will just do like a reclined butterfly pose or some variation where they're not stretching the target area. They're not stretching the quads. They're not stretching the hip flexors. And so I really make sure to do half saddles and plenty of dragon poses and stuff for these populations that tend to really want to avoid this part of the body. People with tight hips can kind of really avoid poses that stretch this part of the body, and I've just turned it into kind of a humor thing in my classes where, you know, the students will grumble and groan and joke with each other about me making them do these hip flexor poses, but it's all in good fun. And also with inflexible groups, we want to work with asymmetrical poses more than symmetrical poses because they are always easier on the body, on the stiffer bodies. So half butterfly instead of caterpillar pose. half saddle instead of saddle, and figure 4 pose is great, and half frog instead of frog is another good choice. And with the older adults, there's when we get into the definitions of yin and yang, which is not new to you if you're here, I'm sure, but yin is more of, as far as our lifespan, we're more yang when we're young, and we're more yin when we're older. So that's one of the reasons older people love yin yoga, and they love lots of rest and rebound. So giving that 1 minute or even 2 minutes after a pose to feel the effects, to rest, to be still, to marinate in the energy of the pose, this is wonderful for older adults. So on the right side, we have some other possibilities of demographics you might be working with. You could be in a college town. That's where I started at Tucson Yoga. I was teaching a lot of younger people with super flexible bodies, and so things like saddle and snail might be totally fine for them, but it's also important to recognize that just because you're younger doesn't mean you're flexible. A lot of people are inflexible at young ages and flexible at old ages, so you need to definitely be aware of your modifications, your other choices for the more intense poses like saddle or snail. And then you can choose symmetrical poses or asymmetrical poses. Here I said symmetrical is better than asymmetrical, but I think I would correct that. It's just that you can definitely have your symmetrical poses in there. And then for a younger or more flexible crowd, yang transitions can be really good, or mixing up yin and yang rather than all that rest. Where I've been in groups of younger people where I definitely sense that if I do too much resting, there can be a sense of like boredom, or they don't come back to the class because it's just a little bit too slow, a little bit too mushy. Also gender, there's some men who absolutely love yin yoga and marinating in lots of shavasana, but I've noticed that younger men in general kind of don't gravitate to quite as much super mushy stillness style yin, and I've noticed that younger men will kind of go for the yin classes that have more yang transitions, or like a yin and yang mix class. And like, again, I'll say there's always exceptions. There's always exceptions. Beginner and corporate classes. So yeah, say you're teaching a class for some group of people that maybe doesn't normally do yoga, or you're not in a yoga studio, it's a different demographic than the yoga studio crowd, then you want to probably talk more just to kind of keep on guiding them in the space. Whereas if you're in like with a group of diehard yogis who already love yin yoga, you can sometimes, like I've had with my regular groups, I hardly have to say anything. I just call the pose and walk around and look at them. And so if you're with a newer group, then they can kind of get nervous when you're not talking. They're like, am I doing something wrong? Why is she not talking? So your voice is, even if they're not even listening to your words, just the gentle timbre of your voice can kind of help to keep their mind connected to the space, can keep them connected to the practice. And also maybe shorter holds for those groups, like 2 minutes instead of 4 or 5 minutes, 2 or 3 at the most for a more beginner crowd. And then you maybe don't even need a full hour-long practice, but like a 40-minute practice or something. Now, if you have a mix of people, this is kind of the hardest type of yin yoga class to teach, right? For any yoga class to teach, because you have to work with all these different needs and bodies and ages and energy levels. So I give options, and I have a classic yin sequence that I mentioned that I'm going to make available to you all with the replay. And the way to go about this is, it's really great if you have a larger class where you can go around the room, and especially with if you have more regular students there, you can celebrate whatever they're doing, whatever option they do. You can say, oh, like, look at Jennifer and how she's got her her legs wider apart in Sphinx pose, and that looks like such a great variation. And then you can point out someone else and look, and Joe has his legs closer together, and it's, you know, just, it's wonderful how many different ways we all do these poses. You can say things like that. That's a technique I learned from Peggy Orr, who's one of my colleagues at Point Reyes Yoga. If any of you are here who've taken her class, she's so good at that. She just celebrates everything everyone is doing. And this is really the attitude we want to have in Yin Yoga. Every so often you're seeing someone do a variation where you're pretty sure they just didn't understand you, right? Or they're not getting the target area, or they're missing something crucial you want them to get. So in those cases, maybe you don't celebrate what they do. Maybe you suggest a change or something. Yeah, to celebrate the variations. And guess what? You can also do this on Zoom. If you're teaching Zoom classes, I've learned that there's this great feature called multi-spotlighting, which just came out in the past couple months, I think. And you can spotlight multiple people, and you can pick like the 2 or 3 people in the class who are, with their consent of course, who are doing the 3 different variations of the pose, and all up on the screen at once, and have them be the models instead of you for the class. This is a great way to teach Yin, which I try to do as often as I can, instead of just me and my body demoing all the poses. And so we have these archetypes in Yin Yoga, the 5 archetypes of Yin. These come from Paul Grilly. And so as you move into teaching Yin, it's really so helpful to know the Yin archetypes. And so a lot of you know them if you've taken a Yin Yoga training with this model. There's definitely Yin Yoga models that don't teach this archetype, but I know that Bernie Clark is teaching this, and Paul Grilly, and I'm not sure about Sarah Powers, and then all of the teachers that have descended from them, if you will. And then using the archetypes is also our way of making sure we're not just teaching a gentle hatha class and calling it Yin Yoga, which is kind of a little peeve of mine, I think, and a lot of Yin teachers. And I struggle with myself because it's not incorrect to teach gentle hatha and call it Yin Yoga, since that's the definition of Yin is when applied to yoga would be a gentler style of yoga, right? But so that's why I capitalize Yin Yoga, because that's more like this style of yoga we do, where we hold these poses in this model of the 5 archetypes, and we hold them for typically 2 to 5 minutes. So here's some more about these archetypes. We have the 5 archetypes here. We dig into these big time in my Yin Yoga teacher training, but here are the 5. We're going to look more at them. We're just going to kind of breeze through them because we don't have time to super dig in, but just for those of you who might be unfamiliar with the 5 groupings of yoga poses in Yin. So there's the straddle pose, there's the glute stretch, which is our external rotation poses, there's the back bend, there's the forward bend, and there's the twist. And those of you who studied with Paul Grilly, you know he calls them different names by the actual pose name, but I'm calling them by these different titles. So this is the straddle. These are the wide leg ones that stretch the groin. So that's the point of these. All the poses in this group are to stretch the groin, the inner thighs. And then here is the glute stretch. So these are all of our external rotation postures. Whoa, why is it disappearing? The shoelace pose, the square pose, the figure 4 pose, sleeping swan pose, and the figure 4 at the wall, which Conrad's doing in the lower right-hand corner. Also for the older adults and the stiffer crowd, that is that's a really great variation because the arms can relax. You don't have to pull the leg in the way the picture above it, the way I'm doing. And I see somebody, Rafa, said something in the chat about swan, about hating swan for so long, now you love it. Yeah, we change throughout the years in our Yin practice, don't we? It's a wonderful thing. Here's the fourth archetype, the forward bend. So these, by the way, I didn't say it for the first three, but these are not the only poses that I have pictures of, because the varieties are infinite. And this model is kind of proposing that there's not a distinct set of poses in these archetypes. It's actually saying like there's an infinite number of variations. So the forward bend can be the caterpillar pose, it can be the child's pose, it can be half butterfly with one leg, it can be the snail pose, it could be the legs up the wall pose, or the happy baby pose, or any variations on these and other forward bends that I didn't mention. And finally, we have the twist. So there's the single leg twist, the double leg twist, the cattail pose, which is also a back bend and quad stretch. And there's the twisted roots in the bottom right. So that's a little very quick overview of the archetypes. And so moving back for a sec, so that's one of the ways to plan a full body practice. One of the best ways really is to have one pose from each one of the archetypes. And that'll usually get you a 40 to 50 minute sequence, depending on how many symmetrical or asymmetrical poses and how long you hold them. And so then repeating something or choosing maybe one symmetrical forward bend and one asymmetrical forward bend or something like that, you can add in if you want to make it an hour-long practice. That's a very common way that I approach yin practices, to cycle through the archetypes. And the order of those can be kind of random, and it's going to be different every time, but it's good to experiment. I have my preferred order, which when you see my classic yin sequence, you'll see what that is. Okay, and moving on to planning and timing yin sequences. So don't forget the rebound. And like I said, different populations savor the rebound more than others. But for the most part, all of us who love yin really love that rebound time, which is that time that is after the pose, when we rest, when we release the pose, and we just get to feel the energy, feel the chi that's been released. So I almost always do about a minute after to feel the energy of the pose. And use a yin timer. So I have this timer that I used for years, which is called a triple bell timer, if you can find it online. And I really have enjoyed this one because it is not attached to the internet in any way. And its only function is to time the pose. So 1, 2, 3 minutes, and it counts down, and I can have it make a noise or not. I don't like the noise it makes. This thing is called, Shake Awake is the brand. This is for actually deaf and blind people, but it comes with a clip that you can clip onto your pants. I used that for years until I got a watch, an Apple Watch, which buzzes my wrist, the timer, and it's silent, and I'm not going back because that's my favorite now. But this got, up until last summer when I got the watch, this was my go-to. And there's also iPhones. The girlies use their iPhone, and they just they put a nice ringtone on it and have that as their timer. A lot of yin teachers do that. Some of them keep it silent and just watch it. And there's also a new iPhone app. If you go into Google Play or the Apple App Store and search for Yin Yoga Timer, there is a new timer app. I learned about it on Yin Yoga Network, and I can't recall the developer's name right now, but people are saying good things about it. I haven't tried it yet myself, but I'd love to hear from anyone who tries it. So when you're planning the timing of a sequence, you have to consider time for transitions, and that's more than just your rebound. That's just the time it takes to get out of a pose and into the rebound, and to get out of the rest or the rebound into the pose. I have calculated for me and my pacing, I have to actually add 15% to the timing. So if I have a sequence on paper that's like, I'm adding up, okay, 3 minutes in this pose, 1 minute rest, 3 minutes in this pose, 2 sides, 1 minute rest. If I just do the straight up math and it comes to 50 minutes, then that in practice is actually a 1 hour sequence. And that's, for me, with the time it takes me to move in between, because I like to give plenty of, not feel rushed or anything. Yeah, another way to do it is to pre-program your whole sequence, and I think that Yin Yoga Timer app does that, which kind of makes you stick to your timing a little bit more. And if you're teaching, I've been making some online classes where I'm trying to get a decent yin sequence into 30 or 40 minutes, and I have used an interval timer app on my watch to get that in, where we don't take as much time in between the poses, and I really kind of stick to a more rigid timing. So that's 2 different ways to plan your timing. And I do like to tell the students the time they're going to be in each pose. I find that they trust me more, and that they are able to relax into their own experience. And I also let them know I'm using a timer. They like that, especially for asymmetrical poses. I've heard from a lot of students that they really don't like it when yin teachers don't use a timer and just kind of wing it. And then they end up in the right and left sides of the poses for totally uneven times. And I know some yin teachers do that. It's fine for your own practice to wing it and just go by when it feels like time to change. But when you're working with a class, it's really a lot more important. Okay, combining yin and yang. Should you do yin before yang or yang before yin? The answer is yes, you can do either. So there is some talk out there in the yin yoga world that you should not do yang before yin, that yin yoga should be done with a cold body, or it should be done in a cold room. And this is really a misinterpretation of yin yoga and how the yin tissues work. And there's Bernie Clark has corrected himself, because he has been known in the past, and he says this, that to say that yin should be done only when the body's not warmed up and maybe when the room is colder. And he has gone back on it. He has a thing on his website that you can find that says that basically he's not saying that anymore, and why, in great detail, as Bernie always does in his writing. He's so wonderfully detailed. So you can do whichever you like. I personally, since I do feel like I'm kind of stiffer people like yang before yin usually, because it loosens them up enough to get into the poses more easily. And people who are more flexible, especially if they fall into the category of maybe being hyper flexible, which is a word that I use that I don't really like using, but I won't talk about that too much right now. But anyway, people who sometimes feel like they might be unstable in their joints when they do yin, they might not want to do yang first. Or they might want to do yang transitions, yin with yang transitions, because the yang in between the yin poses can kind of pull the core back together. It can pull the joints of the hips and the spine back together in a way that for some super flexible people is quite satisfying and makes their joints feel more stable. So to do your planks, your downward dogs, your boat, or to do vinyasas in between your yin poses. For the more flexible crew, that's something I have employed with success. Okay, and options, not modifications. So when we sequence a class, I will always write down, like I'm going to do, for instance, Sphinx and seal pose. And I will write it down on my sequence, like Sphinx/seal, which means I give students a choice, an option to do one or the other of those. I don't say, we're going to do seal, I'm going to do seal, and if that's too intense for you, do Sphinx instead. You know what I mean? I don't present any pose as a lesser pose, because everyone's body is different, and I really want to honor that, and I don't want people to feel like lesser people because they're less flexible or because they just want to take it easier or whatever their reasoning might be. So I choose those two poses because they have the same target area. And so I always make sure to work functionally. This is the functional approach to yoga, where you mention the target area, you offer at least 2 variations or 2 poses for that target area, and then you mention any red flag areas. For instance, in Sleeping Swan, you always want to make sure that feeling it in the knee is not the point of the pose. And if that's where you're feeling it, then you want to choose one of the other variations that I have offered. Sequencing for Zoom classes, considerations: do they have blocks or a bolster? Do they have access to a wall? These are things you can assess in the first few moments of a Zoom class. You can kind of ask people to have their camera on if they can, and then ask. I do a physical hand raise. I know you can do a virtual hand raise in Zoom, but I find lots of people don't know how to use that, or it takes them too long to find it. And so I just say, put your hand up, and I show them like this. Hold your hand up if you have 2 blocks, or if you have 1 block or whatever. I'll do like a little poll. And that gives me a sense of who I'm working with and what props I can work with, and whether or not using a wall is going to be a good idea for that particular group. All right, the end of the slideshow. And that kind of sums up Yin Yoga sequencing with some of the things I've learned from teaching yoga for a few years, teaching Yin Yoga for a few years. So I want to open it up to questions, and I already have some questions that have come in, and I'm kind of just getting a look now at all these chats that came in. Wow, we have people from all over the place here. So if you want to type your question into the chat if you have it. So we've got people from Argentina, Peru. Hello, Mujer. Hello, Leslie from Colorado. We've got Angelique in Novato. We've got Sarah in Colorado. Beth. Oh, wow, there's a lot of people here. So good to see you. Minnesota, Tennessee. Oh, my goodness, all over the place. West Virginia, South Florida, Romania. And we've got a lot of 200-hour teachers, not Yin yet, okay? And a lot of you are already Yin Yoga teachers, as I suspected. Switzerland, woohoo! Tucson. And some of you who are signed up for the teacher training are here. Hi, Patty. I look forward to working with you. People who've taken the training in the past. Hi, Pam. Okay, so how do you feel about music during a Yin class? Asks Rose. That's a great question, and I love to use music. I have found on Zoom it's a little bit of a challenge because there's always someone who doesn't like the volume that it comes through at. So I've used Spotify playlists, and I send people the link in advance with the Zoom link that if they want to play it on a separate device, they can. You can share your screen. And I mean, you can share your sound from your computer and play it on Zoom. And I know a lot of teachers are doing that regularly. And then during live classes, I almost always have music, but I'm really specific about the music that I use. I don't like to have things with a lot of lyrics. I like it to be pretty background, like unless the music is the theme. And I didn't say that when we were talking about all those themes in the beginning, but the music can be the thing you're focusing on in a class. Like, hey, we're going to listen to one of my favorite Yin Yoga music people is Olafur Arnodds, and he has wonderful piano music. And I've just used his music as, yeah. But I find like, especially if there's a female vocalist in a lot of the music, and there's a female teacher, for instance, it can compete with the teacher's voice, and there's too much going on, like the frequencies of the music and the teacher's voice are too much in the same place. So that's something to think about. And then also, says Angelique, that's important, be careful of using recorded music for anything you might publish. You can run into copyright issues. So yeah, I'm going to be doing a segment in the Yin training about finding royalty-free, non-copyrighted music. That's something we don't really have the time to talk about today. So here we go. Lisa says, I'm interested in the training but will not be able to attend much live. Is it workable as a self-paced course? Absolutely. We have some people in different time zones who have joined the training, who are going to be joining us and just watching the recording because they can't, it's going to be like 3 a.m. where they are. So if you sign up for this iteration, you will have until the end of the year to finish your certification. And we're kind of doing it as a group journey that is 30 days long. So if you want the motivation to really be with the program for 30 days, then I do have it laid out in 4 weeks. You have lesson plans for each of the 4 weeks, but you have the room to spread it out longer if you want to. I hope that makes sense. Kathy asks, do you prefer Shavasana or a gentle counter pose for rest and rebound? I love Shavasana, and that's what I use most often. I call it star pose, the Yin version where we just spread out more with our arms and legs, star pose or pentacle pose, and that's my favorite. And I know some teachers also rest on the belly a lot, like after poses where that's a more convenient position. Child's pose. I personally don't want to counter stretch all the time. I don't really like to propose that you have to counter stretch or even should counter stretch after Yin poses because that can, we actually want to be with that energy that sometimes makes us want to contract in the opposite direction, instead to just rest and let the body unfold and let that energy move and morph and develop into whatever next form it wants to take in your body is more the approach of the rebound. Yeah. Do I have a feeling of the general theme that the meridian approach is what people expect more from a Yin class rather than others? Rafa, that's a good question. When people come to a Yin class, do they want to have the teacher be talking about meridians, or do they want to have an experience of being guided in the meridians? And I find that's not generally what it is. Some people are, they really enjoy that, and it's really the teacher's choice. And I kind of encourage teachers to use some restraint with it, because when we get into talking about meridians too much, like if you Google any particular meridian and say the emotional qualities of the kidney meridian or something, what you find is I just did this recently, you find a ton of posts about fear and worry and all this negative stuff around what the emotions of that meridian are. And it's very hard to find information about what are the positive emotional attributes of that meridian. So if you're going to be teaching on the emotional level of the meridians, which is what a lot of people are thinking about when they think about presenting in the meridian model, I find when I'm a student and as a teacher that if I bring a lot of words in, like worry and anger and fear and imbalance, it actually creates that worry in the student. It actually has the opposite effect that I want in my Yin class. So I really try and stick, if I'm going to bring anything in, I stick to working with the kidney meridian can make us feel more confident. Having balance here can make us feel more able to be in the world with I don't know, just the positive things about it. That said, I don't really work with the meridians that much, and my reason for that is that I've kind of tried to have an experiential journey with these maps of the meridians that are given to us, and in my body I don't really find energy flowing in those paths. And so because I have had these rebel teachers I really like to honor the path that energy does flow and know that it's different for everyone, and that it's really like our anatomy that we work with in Yin Yoga, where every body is different, everyone's bones are different, everyone's subtle energy experiences are different. And so we can use language really skillfully to guide people into awareness of that energy without suggesting that they're supposed to feel it in a certain place or along a certain path, or that their emotions are supposed to be connected to a certain chakra or a certain meridian line, because in reality these experiences can happen anywhere in the body, and they can be quite different from one person to the other. And let's see, someone's asking another question about the Yin training. The assessment is designed just within this training portal that I have. You say you've completed the various videos and assignments. You submit your assignments on the portal, and so the final assessment is that you have submitted all the things, and I've reviewed it, and then you're good to go. So you have until the end of the year to do that. And Pam says she loved my kidney meridian class. So yes, after I said all that, I still sometimes do teach a class on the meridian. So I have a kidney meridian class on YouTube and on my website, and I have a liver meridian class. Claudia says, I feel so free not having the obligation of teaching Yin Yoga with the meridians. Yeah, I mean, it's good to remember too that the meridian system is meant for doctors applying to patients. This is the traditional Chinese medicine is like it's really kind of outside of our scope as yoga teachers, unless we're yoga therapists or we're trained Chinese medicine practitioners, that this model is created for sort of diagnosing and prescribing treatments for people. And that's really, we need to be kind of careful about that in our Yin Yoga practice. So when I do talk about the meridians, I kind of just use it as a suggestion. Like this pose is for the groin, which is where the liver meridian runs. And the liver meridian, when it's in balance, can be related to this and this and this quality. Or I can just even talk about the path of that meridian, and I'll always be careful to say, like, you may or may not feel it on this path where the liver meridian is said to travel. I'll say it something like that. Baby Kramer, is that your name? Baby Kramer says, I stay away from meridians even though my two teachers are Taoist and TCM. This is simply because I do not have in-depth knowledge, and so I want to throw it, and I don't want to throw it out there. Yeah, I hear you, and I'm not a TCM practitioner, so yeah, exactly. So would I agree that restorative and yin are similar in style, asks Rose. Yes and no. So when we talk about something being yin and being yoga, there is the strange fact that restorative yoga would probably be more yin than yin yoga, right? Because in restorative, we are really working to have the body be supported and held by props, and to have a feeling of really releasing. And there's not so much a doing as much as there is in yin yoga. There's a doing in the sense that we usually have a target area. We're trying to stretch or stress a certain part of the body. And so there's more going on than in restorative. So that's kind of the main difference between yin and restorative, I'd say. A lot of the poses are the same. Like dragonfly is in both, depending on what restorative teacher you're working with. Yeah, and it's really, like legs up the wall pose is a restorative pose, but for one of those stiffer people like I was talking about, who doesn't do seated poses easily, it's probably not really a restorative feeling pose for them. It's probably like a pretty intense stretch of the back of the legs and the back of the spine. And so you'd want to do legs up the wall quite differently, or a different pose altogether. So we need to apply our functional approach and our awareness of skeletal variation and stuff to students that are in restorative as well. So one or two more questions. Claudia asks, is it in Is it suggested in a sequence after a pose to have a counter pose as the next pose? Oh, I see. That's the question you asked before. You can, but you certainly don't have to. Yeah, that can be interesting to do, and it can feel really great, like after a back bend, to do a forward bend. So I don't necessarily suggest it. I suggest trying it and seeing if you like it, but you don't have to at all. You don't. There's not going to be any sense of like not being complete if you don't counter stretch. So we have time for one more question, or if you can elaborate on that one. And so I'm going to put in the link if you want to dive into the training with me or ask me any questions. Here's the URL, training.devidalyyoga.com. It's a 30-day or longer training that starts this Saturday, 50 hours yin yoga training. And you don't have to be a yoga teacher to do this training if you want to just do it for your own practice. And if you want to direct any questions to me, here's my direct email, devi@devidaly.com. So thank you so much for joining me. The replay will be up. You'll get a link, and I'll see you soon. Namaste, everyone.